We're going to be right back. We're talking to Cliff High. Cliff, what's your site with all the cool graphics? Where's that at?
HalfPastHuman.com. You pick it up off the main page called Radio
go
Special.
there. Yeah, go there and look at his graphics. Are great. Okay, I'm Jay Weidner. We're listening to the Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. And we're back. Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. I'm Jay Weidner. We're talking to Cliff High, Half Past Human. Go to Radio Special there at the top and look at all the great stuff. One of the things that I started tracking after I finished with the Henday work was to see if there was anybody doing anything in the power structure to prepare for what the Henday material was saying was going to happen. And, that's when I found the Georgia Guidestones and the stuff in the Denver airport, and I started finding all this creepy stuff everywhere.
I was just going to call it creepy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and then I began looking into Freemasonry in a real way, and reading some of the more obscure Freemasonic books and things. And what I've come to realize is that the entire purpose of Freemasonry, as far as I can tell, is to pass on the information of this disaster.
Sure, and to perpetuate that and get them motivated and carry that forward, whether they know it or not. Yeah,
absolutely. And they have Robert Lawler has a book coming out, and I don't want to ace him on this because it's so cool. But he proves that that the people who built the United States know that there's some disaster coming. And I'm not talking about the people that are alive now. I'm talking about the people who created the United States. The founding fathers were completely aware of all this. And when you see his material, you just can't, it's impossible to believe. Impossible. And I want to get another thing out about what you were talking about with this 19.5. The Merkaba, of course, most people know, and Hoagland's work, and we know that there's these massive outpourings on all the planets at 19.47. And what Cliff's saying is that when these bands finally cross over into this latitude zone, that's when they're going to begin throwing out, right?
That's actually the crook of the arm in the 11,000 years leading up to the explosion, as the planets twist the equator and pull these arms into a distorted bent position. As that angle crawls up past 19.47, that's when a sunspot is created normally.
Normally, actually, right.
Okay, and then actually you'll get to a point where if you think about it as like strings wound around a croquet ball, eventually you can't get any of the bends to go up that high because you're down near the equator. You've essentially filled up the ball. And that's where we're at now, I believe. And the sunspots that we're going to see now will not occur from the bend actually going up to 19.47, but rather from an individual strand of the yarn around the croquet ball being twisted and twisted and twisted in and of itself to the point that it flops around kind of like a garden hose with too much water going through it, right? And as it does so, it will expose that 19.47 degree area occasionally for these brief and rather chaotic form of sunspots that will not really follow a normal sunspot pattern.
Gotcha.
If I'm correct about this, those sorts of sunspots, probably you'd never get more than 2 or 3 of them clustering together instead of the large groups that we've sometimes seen. And their lifespan should be very brief and extremely violent in terms of what they're throwing off, because they're basically, we can think of as sort of like the rocking of the pressure cooker weight at an extreme level and little bits of steam coming out occasionally, because it's that kind of tension that's occurring that causes these forms of sunspots. And I'm still tracking space weather in NOAA and a few of the other places to see if this recent one is indeed one of those, since we've had such a huge absence of them, 200-plus days this year, an exceptional length of time. In fact, it's so long, it's got the stellar evolutionists talking about a Maunder-style minimum, an ice age forming lack of sunspot period, which coincidentally, if you read, what's his name, Price's work, I think, the guy who wrote Not by Fire, but by Ice.
Oh, yeah. Great writer, yeah.
Yeah, and he's talking about these magnetic reversals, which is exactly what is the cause for the flip within the Earth itself. Right. And all of this stuff is indeed encoded. intelligent ways in all these myths, and it's like, aha, they were trying to tell us something. But getting back to something I wanted to say earlier was, you're mentioning about the living in the caves in Peru. That's also the same story from some of the Salish-related Native Americans up here east of the mountains, where they record living in caves for a long time. But what I find curious is the myth structure around the, say, near the tropical through the equatorial regions of the planet discuss survival by boat, whereas those in the upper regions discuss the issue of fire and surviving in caves. Quite curious, because there's a predicted, in one of Gerald's books, a predicted effect from this, and that is that as this flip occurs, and the magnetosphere is quite literally turned it completely around with a giant hole in it, that in the temperate zones, both north and southern hemisphere, you might get in a situation where you would be absolutely incredibly inundated with all kinds of flaming objects from space, simply because there's nothing out there to repel them.
Right. Exactly. And it would, you would think at that point anything could happen, and we could get, we really don't know. I mean, the slightest fire with the winds could spread and destroy thousands of acres of forest. Waves could be pushed very high. And,
that's a curious issue. There's some of the literature that has survived, that if you read it correctly, it's actually from people that survived the whole process. And there's in one of the Sanskrit literatures, there's a Sanskrit literature where there's this sea captain who writes about the occurrence of 55 hours, basically, of a horrific hell that ended up moving him nearly 1,500 miles.
That's seriously traveling.
Especially by sail.
I've heard a lot of those stories. I've collected a lot of them, actually, from all over, including the Salish. And I'm Jay Weidner. We're talking to Cliff High. You're listening to the Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. Go to Half Past Human. Look at the graphics. We're going to talk about the Nazis and stuff, too, because I think they knew about it. Believe it or not, Hitler visited the Henday Cross. Okay, we'll be back. All right, this is too good. We're just going to get going right away. I'm Jay Weidner. You're listening to Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. We're talking to Cliff High, and we're talking about his work and Patrick Gerald's work on magnetics of the sun and how this is probably the key to understanding the physics around what's going to happen in 2012. And the Nazis were obsessed by all this stuff, and I've been following that story for a long time. And your discovery of the swastika type motion, looking down from the north of this magnetic thing, it just strikes me because, the Nazis are the black sun, and they have a lot of solar kind of myths and motifs. And when Hitler visited Henday in 1940, I don't think I put this in the book, but he actually, the first thing he did as soon as the train car pulled into Henday was walk straight up to the Cross of Henday.
Very interested then, yeah. Well, I know that they took it actually from the Jane. The swastika actually was taken for the National Socialist Party from the symbols on the Jane palm, all of which are associated within the Jane cosmology with the sun and periodic catastrophes.
Yes, and Jainism is a really comes as like a hybrid of Dravidian culture, which carried on a lot of the traditions that speak about a catastrophe. In fact, they're the creators of the Yuga system and all of that. So it's very interesting how all this begins to dovetail together.
It's scary, yeah. Yeah, if it was just one or two cultures, and then you could convince yourself you were being nuts, that kind of thing. But repeatedly getting kicked in the head by all of this, and then seeing the non-random numbers, the continuous repetition from the Norse myths all the way through the Hindus and the Mayans for the irrational component of the numbers associated with the sunspot cycle, and it's like there's a big in there.
Yeah. The thing that people think really have to understand, and it's very important because if you don't understand this, you won't get the rest of it. There really has to have been an advanced culture, a very advanced culture, in the distant past. And they figured all this out and did everything they could to pass that information down. And once you understand that, then everything begins to click together. But the key is to not look at it with your own filters, to try to look at it with what they were trying to tell us and not with what you think they were trying to tell us. And I think that's what you did. You looked at this with a clear head, and it's very, very frightening. I don't know what to say. I want to order one of your boats. I can get to 10,000 feet, but in about 20 minutes from where I live.